So with border security in the mix of conversation, primarily thanks to Donald Trump for bringing that to attention with the tariffs, and now Canada's finally starting to at least scrutinize with the border protection and having, to deal with the influx of migrants and the influx of drugs and cartels and crime and everything in between. We're finally seeing a bit of progress, but not to the same extent. And it's because of stories like this, ladies and gentlemen. So this is from Blender News, which they do a lot of great work over there. I highly recommend checking out the YouTube channel. They primarily do a lot of shorts, but you can also see live, like full-on footage. Full-on footage. You know what I mean. Anyway, Blender News says corruption threatens Canada's security. The Sinaloa Cartel and other narco groups have infiltrated the Canadian government. Whistleblower Luke Sabrin exposes the CBSA corruption while leaders remain silent about terrorists and criminals. Is Canada safe? So this is the border protection, named Border Security Alliance, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong the acronym, but that's the border agents. And he was a whistleblower that exposed the mass corruption that allowed for the increase of migrants that are bringing the crime, that are bringing drugs, that are allowing this to happen in the streets of Canada. And this guy, the whistleblower, was testifying in the House of Commons, right in front of the Senate, right in front of the people. And he was threatened by the CBSA, losing his job, losing his, because he was a whistleblower, because he was exposing the mass amount of corruption of bringing these cartels into the country. So watch what Blender News says about this.
Canadian Border Security Agency whistleblower says transnational gangs have compromised government agencies, helping terrorists and spies enter Canada. Luke Sabrin, a former CBSA officer, alleges that the CBSA databases and operations have been compromised, aiding the entry of dangerous individuals into Canada. He warns that Canada's security is at risk due to systemic corruption and the failure of accountability measures. Sabrin's allegations align with concerns raised in a 2019 CBSA threat brief, which warned of transnational criminal organizations exploiting CBSA systems and personnel.
When these things happen, you have to take action, or people like you and I don't trust our institutions anymore. When you have the Sinaloa cartel somehow baked into our government institutions and they're able to threaten a CBA officer's kids at his house, so when that happens, you're kind of going, oh, there's no rules. Give credit to this guy for even saying anything. If you've got a gang of people that can come into my country and do whatever you want, and you have that kind of push, and I'm the one that loses because other CBSA agents are compromised and giving my information up, what the hell is happening here?
So now you kind of understand where Trump is coming from when he says, hey, you got to fix your damn border or we're going to put tariffs on. Because you have criminal narco cartels from all across the globe coming into Canada, exploiting our institutions and threatening kids, threatening the children of the border agents because they get infiltrated into those institutions that are supposed to protect us. And then you wonder where the influx of crime comes from. You wonder where the influx of narcotics come from. How there's fentanyl in the streets of Vancouver. How there's fentanyl in the streets of Toronto. All this. And this happened in 2019. And here we are in 2025. And finally, they're finally recognizing that the border is an issue. In 2025. This happened in 2019. No wonder why Trump had to basically bend her asses over in order to protect the border. So this is in hindsight of this story, which I saw they brought up in the video. But this is from Duhame's Anti-Money Laundering Law in Canada. This former DA agent says they were caught off guard on deep infiltration of Mexican cartel drug trafficking operation in Canada. This is from January 1st of 2019. And I'm just hearing about this now. I'm just hearing about this now as we're finally, putting issue on border security and protecting people and making sure that, we have a safe measure for people coming into the country, that they're documented, that they have good intentions, that they want to apply for citizenship, that they're able to do full legally and not just bring in randos that God knows what can happen. So, Andrew Hogan, a former agent of the Drug Enforcement Agency, who, as part of the multi agency task force that included Homeland Security investigations, successfully hunted and located the most wanted cartel leader in the world, El Chapo Guzman, says that when monitoring the Sinaloa activities, I'm sorry I'm mispronouncing it, the DEA, were most surprised by the extent of El Chapo's operations in Canada. El Chapo was the head of the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico and the Sinaloa cartel as the most powerful drug cartel under his tenure. In his book, Hunting El Chapo, Hogan describes how he and his colleagues monitored and traced cell phone records to locate El Chapo, and during that process, he learned that the Sinaloa was expanding into the Philippines, the UK, and the Netherlands, searching for commercial properties with refrigeration capabilities for drug trafficking purposes. How is it that I'm just hearing about this now and this didn't get national attention? How is it that the CBC or CTV or Global News or any of these outlets made it the mainstream attention in 2019 that it should have been? Transnational criminal organizations seek refrigeration services because drugs are often trafficked internationally in bulk food shipments. Steaks, vegetables, for example, the Montreal Mafia are allegedly known to send drugs from the Dominican Republic to Canada in refrigerated food products such as eggplants or green peppers. But Hogan writes, we were completely caught off guard by El Chapo's deep infiltration of Canada. Keep in mind, this was late 2015, not long ago. So this has been going on for quite an extensive period, ladies and gentlemen. And we're just finding about this information now. He writes, in terms of profit, Chapo was doing more cocaine business in Canada than the United States because retail cocaine in the United States is less profitable than in Canada. His key cartel lieutenants could exploit weaknesses in the Canadian system. The top-heavy structure of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police hampered law enforcement efforts for even the most routine drug arrests and prosecution. It was perfect match for El Chapo, hindered law enforcement, and an insatiable Canadian appetite for high-grade coke, writes Hogan. Not surprising, most of what Hogan writes about the Mexican drug cartel activities in Canada are connected only in Vancouver. Which, how many stories have we covered that, particularly in Vancouver and BC, where a lot of drug trafficking and human trafficking occur, where people in the ports of BC that were protesting not only for sustainable wages for the workers, but they were protesting because they heard voices within the cargo ships, within the containers of those cargo ships. And they were speculating that there was a human trafficking circle afoot using the port workers to smuggle people into Canada through cargo containers. How many stories have we covered that? How many stories have we covered about human trafficking exploitation in the city of Vancouver? So it's sadly not surprising, but it's shocking that I have to learn now, over 10 years. That over 10 years, now I have to learn this in 2025 when they finally recognize that, yeah, the border should be, beefed up a little bit more. That maybe we need a little bit more security to defend these horrific gangs and these horrific activities from coming into the streets of Canada. In his book, Hogan describes how as they got deep into Sinaloa and cartel land in Mexico, nearing of one capture of El Chapo, they came across a warehouse of green bananas and remnants of cocaine cutting agents. The green bananas were plastic used for international shipments. A single fake banana holds half a kilo of cocaine, and Hogan writes, immediately I remembered how Hondo in British Columbia was constantly looking for a warehouse large enough to store fruit deliveries for the boss. These fake bananas were not likely going to directly to Vancouver to be unloaded, then shipped out to cities all across Canada. As you can see, El Chapo pulled in over $2 million in cocaine sales in one day's report in just 3 Canadian cities. Since drug sales are 24/7, the annual take for El Chapo in Canada on an annual basis can probably be estimated to be 1.04 million, or sorry, 1.04 billion, or slightly over 1 billion. This has been going on for years. Years. And it took Donald Trump to scare the bejesus out of our politicians to finally recognize the border. Something that all Canadians have been screaming about for a long while now. And maybe it's because of stuff like this. Maybe it's not because everybody's a racist or they're narcissistic or they're not accepting. That's not the Canadian way. We need to be more diverse. No, it's because we need to be secure so that we don't have international drug cartels operating in the grounds of Canada, which would have been laundered back to Mexico from his lieutenants in Vancouver through financial and intermediaries. You can read here how El Chapo and the cartel members sent cocaine and fentanyl to Buffalo, disguised as or hidden in food imports using private companies, and laundered the proceeds of crime through the U.S. banks. El Chapo was captured on January 8, 2016 in Mexico, extradited to the United States, and is now in trial in New York for drug trafficking, money laundering, and organized criminal activities. Again, how is it that this happened nationally in this country, in Canada, and nobody said a word about this? Nobody said a word about this until I saw it through Blender News. How is that possible? And how is it possible that while this is going on and well acknowledged, and we know that there's massive amount of corruption with the border agents, they still were less concerned about the border until Donald Trump, the incoming president, told Justin Trudeau and Parliament that you need to beef up your security, you need to deal with this fentanyl crisis, you need to deal with the pouring in of people that you're smuggling illegally, mostly for temporary work. You got to deal with this situation, or we're going to put tariffs on your country. And that is where people finally clued in to say, yeah, we got to do something about this border problem. And yet, there's still politicians that don't cue into that. They haven't connected the dots. They still think that, oh, Trump's a meanie, and that's why he's putting the tariffs on. So we're going to put our own tariffs on. Well, if you're going to put tariffs on aluminum and steel and all Canadian exports, then you won't get playing cards. You won't get our Canadian whiskey. The LCBO won't be stocking your booze. And all Donald Trump was doing was trying to send a signal, was trying to wave his arms and go, hey, idiots, your border is a problem. It's a mess right now. And it's because of this. Because you have drug cartels flourishing within the streets of the country. And primarily in Western provinces, which we know that Western provinces deeply, deeply concerned about border security. They've been demanding for years that Canada had a way to defend the country with those borders, with the borders of the prairie provinces and BC. And we're just finally scratching that surface today. Finally. But this has been going on for over a decade. Over a decade, and they made billions of dollars in Canada that they were well known about. Wow. And now you have the CBSA, which let's show this video here. So this is the guy that they mentioned, the CBSA whistleblower. This is Luke Sabrin, sharing his story to the people of Parliament, to the parliamentarian in the House of Commons. And this is scary. This is scary stuff, ladies and gentlemen, because even just acknowledging that, hey, the cartels came in to this country and are orchestrating with the CBSA, they're corrupted within this agency that's supposed to protect the border and protect people flooding the countries and bring crime from elsewhere. His life was being threatened. So let's hear his story.
Mesdames et messieurs.
Thank you very much for having me today. I'd like to thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Garand and Ms. Vignola. My name is Luc Sabrin. I'm 55 years old. I'm a father of 2 young children, a 16-year-old girl and a 12-year-old boy. I am an internal federal whistleblower. I was the main operator for quality control of critical and specific information entries into a federal database that contributed in part to national and international security. I have held the highest restricted security clearance in the exercise of my duties in operational environments for the Canadian government, and that for 26 years of service without incident in my career record. My career began on August 13, 1990, and ended abruptly and tragically on February 16, 2016. During the period of March 2009 to February 2016, I witnessed several instances of wrongdoing and criminal acts in my workplace. On February 16, 2016, I received a supposed administrative dismissal, and this administrative procedure was the final phase on the part of my employer after 8 years of psychological, physical, and administrative harassment. This disguised dismissal was a major...
So he was being harassed by the CBSA for blowing the whistle about the corruption with the cartels. He was being harassed. His family was being harassed by the people that are supposed to be protecting the borders, by people that are supposed to be protecting the country from cartels, from criminals entering. And the whistleblower is being threatened.
Major retaliatory step on the part of the employer for 2 reasons. An external investigation, but an extremely limited one and under administrative control, revealed and demonstrated that the employer was guilty of harassment against me. Second, I used the internal disclosure process, and I religiously followed the employer's internal guidelines and protocols on disclosure of wrongdoing and criminal acts in the federal workplace. A major campaign of retaliation against me was initiated by management and fellow employees with the sole purpose of harming and destroying me in order to catch me in the act and justify a dismissal. This was for 8 years. I was the victim of extremely excessive psychological, physical, administrative harassment in the workplace, as well as a smear campaign, abusive management, and unjustified threats on behalf of colleagues and management staff to the point of my psychological collapse.
So they teamed up, the CBSA, the cartels that were in part of the corruption scheme. They were infiltrated within that agency, within that within those parks. And the people that are working with the CBSA all ganged up against him because he, through all the legal channels, all the legal representation, was trying to expose this corruption. The fact that our protection agency for the border was compromised and jeopardized by criminal cartels of international heights, by Chapo, And they were flourishing narcotics through private companies, selling them off to the streets, and they were making billions of dollars in the streets of Canada, allowing this to continue on. And again, it literally is amazing that I have to learn this now. That I literally had to learn this now, and nowhere have I seen, not even this video, I haven't seen since before then, since before now. As they're finally getting scrutinized on protecting people with the border. And the person that was blowing the whistle was psychologically and physically damaged working at that agency. That all he was trying to do was blow the whistle, blow the cover, and say, hey, this agency, this institution is being compromised by international criminal cartels that were flourishing Canadians with drugs and drug trafficking and human smuggling into the country, primarily through BC, which is known to have human smuggling crisis in those borders. So exactly why we need to secure the border. Why exactly we need to reinforce, especially in those areas, especially in the western provinces, we need better border security, better border protection. I stated, the compromise that I stated was, hey, how about all the troops that are overseas right now that are dying in vain, that we really don't need to be over there, other than the fact that we need global dominance in other countries. We send them back home. They're closer to their families. They're out of harm's way. And we use soldiers to defend the borders. That would actually defend something. That would defend something, especially a criminal cartel this big that was operating in Canada. And it is devastating that went on for so long. And I had to hear about it from Blender News. So thank God for them to actually point this story out. Because I don't think I've ever noticed this. And this should have got the more nationalized attention that it needs. And this is what's waking people up to realize the border is a problem. That flourishing people and that influx of migrants is not diversity. It's insane. It's psychotic. It's smuggling people into the country, throwing them into our streets, and then trying to mix and mingle and exploit those people the same way they're exploiting us with cheap labor. So this is a crisis. This is a crisis. This is alarming. This is where people need to stand up, and we need strong leadership. That's why Daniel Smith, the Premier of Alberta, has been the front man to go down to Donald Trump and negotiate and say, hey, we're going to fix our borders. Let's talk about the tariffs. Let's try to diminish them by going into a trade negotiation. This is why. This is why. Trump can be reasonable. It's not, he's just a bully all the time. He can be reasonable. And the reason he mentioned about the border is exactly because of this. Exactly because of these situations that happen periodically in Canada and just never seems to be dealt with. Never. And you wonder why the streets of Toronto, Vancouver, Ottawa, Montreal, anywhere you go to these days, is just an absolute mess.